Let me begin with say a very word of thanks to you and Isra for providing us this opportunity to be a part of this wonderful panel discussion on one of the very relevant topic of the time, which is a truly needed one, and which actually sets the tone, sets the pace of the tone, like how civil society is going to operate in after post COVID or the in the current COVID scenario currently. So let me begin with the role of civil society. That what exactly the civil society and the role of organization NGOs, what they are doing currently. So as you all know that NGOs has a very vital role to play. It's not only from the current time, but from the very past, from the history. If you see the history of the country and the culture of the society of India, there are numerous examples where civil society organizations are coming forward in terms of providing help to most of the one of the disadvantaged communities across the country, whether it's a tribal, or the poor, vulnerable women and children, urban poor, homeless population, or any other in a various forms and various different manners altogether. So from the history, if you see that there is a substantial role of the civil society organization, both informal as well as the informal manner. So most of the NGOs are working through a set of different laws which are governed by the Indian Constitution. But apart from that, there are societal structure, there are religious structures which actually largely support the disadvantaged communities in India. And if we see in terms of the data, so the government of India and in 2015 almost estimated that there are almost 3.4 million NGOs in India, which again depends on there are many more NGOs across the country, length and the breadth of the country, what they are doing and the different shapes. But this is the total estimation of figure. These NGOs are currently operating in India in the form of SSG groups, social movements, then the women's group, NGOs, professional body, constitution, consultancy organization, and many more, So I'm sure that the figure 3.4 million must be, there are, apart from this figure, there are many more NGOs which are operating in India. And if you see the funding pattern, I'm just trying to highlight some of the characteristics of this organization, because it's easy to understand how NGOs are operating and in which manner and in which capacity they have functioned, so that we will able to justify the role of the and the activities these NGOs are operating. So Asian Center for Human Rights in the year 2013 has highlighted the fact that there is a report which says that the government funding cap of the NGOs, which is basically the central government fund, state government fund, and other funds, basically the government funding, is at a limit of 220,000 crores in the last 2 decades. If you see the funding pattern, that government has extended a help of 20,000 crore to in the last 2 decades to different NGOs through different schemes across the different ministries and the department. There are various schemes and patterns which are supposed, so that the government is trying to help and extending the reaching out to the vulnerable population through NGOs. So almost the value of 20,000 crore. And if you see the foreign funding, which is comes under the FCRA, Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, so it's almost as close as 2 lakh crore in the last 2 decades. If you see, so there are huge possibility of outreach of NGOs across the length and breadth of the country, across the most of the vulnerable population, which government or any other private sector has not been able to reach. So the NGOs has an advantage to actually reach out and working closely with this population. And the funding gap, funding of almost 20,000 crore of local funding, government funding, and as well as 2 lakh crores of the FCRA funding. Besides that, there are other methods like the individual contribution, donations by the different organization, and the local funding, which are far which are away from this particular figure. But there are. So what I'm trying to highlight is the role of and the contribution of NGO in this sector. So they have an immense role and the presence across the length and the breadth of the country. Now, it is when it comes to the COVID, which is one of the very unprecedented time in the history. And if we see, it is there are examples that various international government, international organization has see particular this COVID-19 problem as high as the level and the rank of the World War Second or Second World War. So you can imagine that this is not the ordinary emergency, but this is the emergency of the time where people are struggling, government are struggling, trying to find out the ways. Health, health is one of the major challenge. Then economy is another challenge. Then food security and the migration, with particularly in India, comes as one of the another challenge for the Indian government as well as the different society as well. So people do not have any resources in terms of whether it's talk about the different resources altogether. 400 million people, almost 80% of our Indian workforce, primarily working in the unorganized sector, primarily the landless laborers, the migrant workers, our homeless population, and many more are struggling to find their jobs. And World Bank and other different organization has estimated that it is basically if the support mechanism has not been extended, so there is a high chances and the probability that they will deeper go into the poverty racket once again. So again, this is a time where social security net, safety net is very much important for this particular set of people. And here the role of comes of the NGOs, which are actually working round the clock all together with the government, district administration, state government, national government, and many more organizations, and especially directly working with the communities. So altogether, if we see Niti Aayog, which is one of the think tank of the country, the premier think tank of the country and supported by Government of India, has basically Mr. Amitabh Kant, which is the CEO of Niti Aayog, has basically written a letter to different NGOs, almost 1 lakh NGOs. He has sent a letter and asking them to their support. And this is because of the reach and the presence of the NGOs across the length and breadth of the country. And NGOs also has come forward to help in this difficult times. And there are many examples, for example, ranging from the grassroots level to directly from the national, international level and the United Nations also, where a lot of people and there are different funds which are contributing substantially to this fund. And United Nations has declared a fund of $2 billion fund of Global Humanitarian Response Fund, which is basically implemented by the different civil society organization. And World Bank very recently has come up with the exclusive COVID funding support to Government of India, which was signed in the month of April 2020. And this is again a 7,500 crore project, which is being rolled out with the help of Ministry of Health across the country, where 3 kind of support is basically they foresee in this particular dynamic project. First is the strengthening of our district hospitals. Second is the latest technology, and third and the most important part is strengthening the communities, which is again 500 to 600 crores rupees fund, which is actually through the support of non-government organizations. So you can imagine there is in each and every aspect of the government program or the private sector or the CSR fund or the World Bank or the United Nations, there are role of NGOs which cannot be ruled out easily. So it is a high time that that these organization has come up this thing. Now, what exactly NGOs are, the change in the activities of the NGOs, the topic of the current topic, which is very high. So we have to understand that in terms of the change in the activities are largely depend on the kind of funding, what exactly the organizations are doing or the NGOs are doing currently. For example, NGOs are primarily depend on 2 or 3 level source of funding. First is a grant, which is basically from either from the government or the private sector or the CSR or the foreign contribution or support by the local communities, NGOs, crowdfunding and donations, and the consultancy and other work. So these are the primarily kind of funding. So if you see closely and closely monitor the funding pattern and the mechanism of the NGOs, it is largely depend on the funding from the other sources. That is why, which is why it is very important for them to, in order to survive, to sustain, and to become a part of this thriving economy and the society. It is very important to continuously sustain funding for their programs. But if you see in largely in last 5 year or 10 year, and very recently after the COVID times, there is a substantial funding crunch, both in national as well as the internationally as well, which is not only the problem of India per se, but the problem of and the challenges of across civil society across the globe itself, whether it's UK, Philistine, London, USA, or any other country. Civil society is facing a very funding crunch. For example, almost 30 to 40% CSR funding has been reduced. If you talk about the UK charities, which is almost 50% UK charities losing their income, and which is as high as, if we combine the total income, so it is as high as pound 1.28 billion, or pound 1.28 billion pounds. So it is a huge amount where the funding, but it's not only it's a limited fund, but there are a huge amount which is cutting the interventions of the different NGOs, which is why, and there, it has a two level implication. First, in the terms of their staffing. So NGOs are facing this particular problem of reducing the staff. For example, first, almost 20 to 30% formal or informal after the COVID, which is they are facing. Second, if we talk about the programs, which is basically the lifeline of the NGOs, we see that there are new together. The way NGOs in operating till now, it's a complete change, because NGOs till now is basically are having a substantial presence within the community. So they are basically the one who are actually present everywhere. But now after this COVID scenario and the issue of social distancing in the programs, lack of travels and travel cuts altogether, this has posed a serious risk. So they have to come up with the new technologies altogether. For example, safety of staff which are directly working at the field level, whether it's community level workers which are closely working with ANMs, ASHA, Anganwadi centers, or the villages, or the community, or the urban slums. Their safety and concerns are equally very crucial and important. And NGOs has to see that how we can actually ensure their safety. Second is the social distancing. So within the purview of the social distancing, and the COVID will be remain what the different agencies has predicted is almost at least a year, and so maybe the after effects will be remain. So how within the purview of social distancing, the organizations programs will thrive. So that is another challenge for us. So we have to come up with the different strategies for that thing. Then rethinking the delivery pattern, that what is the delivery pattern of the organization, how we can actually reach out to the most communities, how we can actually provide support and sustenance to them. Jobs cut and the migration is another major challenge, which is very crucial for these people. So we have to come up with the new innovation technologies and things, and the digital medium is one of the very important aspect in this regard. So that is way forward. So keeping all this in view, we would like to suggest few way forward that how we can actually come up and survive in this difficult scenario. So first and the foremost, my suggestion would be in terms of the funding, because funding is a major problem and issue. So one of the important suggestion I would like to suggest here is develop the financing mechanism, which basically support a non-government organization to sustain and thrive in this COVID times. Second is COVID-19 response investment vehicle establishment, which is basically this is supported by the World Economic Forums. So World Economic Forum has come up with a strategy that NGOs should establish this responsive investment vehicle for the COVID-19, which help them in terms of sustain and thrive. Third is establishment of a corpus fund, or the liquidity fund, which a lot of NGOs are already practicing, but there is now a more strong need to work on to that aspect. Then developing a risk framework mechanism. So as I said earlier, that NGOs are primarily depend on the donors to provide funds. So we have to come up with a strong risk mechanism where the risk is not only on the NGOs, but also how we can actually donors for this particular thing, and ensure the alternative funding aspect as well. said what are the different alternative funding aspects where we can actually come up and other things. Then the delivery model of the organization in terms of the program is also needs to be changed. Digital communication is also again very important medium where we need to come up with a strong strategy that how effective we can use the digital medium to reach out to the different vulnerable communities. Social distancing, community hotspots identification are the another area, and another important aspect area is capacity building of the NGO workers. Again, it is a very crucial area because NGO workers are primarily the one who are working directly with the communities with a little experience in terms of the high level policies forums and other things. So we need to develop a mechanism sharing of the knowledge, building their capacities, and come up with a strong mechanism to work closely, build their capacities so that we can actually reach out to them. And last and the fourth most important part is the working closely with the government. So this is the very, as I said earlier, it's a very unprecedented times, and rather than and it is a time which actually call for working closely with the different state government, district administration, as well as the central government to support them into their endeavors. How can actually we help the government and the different organizations to come up with these things? And I'm very happy to share with you that Global Pathfields has already started these interventions in our strategies, and we are trying to roll out some of these programs in these strategies into our programs and reaching out to different vulnerable communities. And this is one of the challenging times, so we have to come up with a strong mechanism and require a support of all segments of society, especially the youth, which are I'm sure that they have a very wonderful ideas and the potential to come up with a different solution, which actually help us the NGOs to reach out very closely with the and the empowerment of the communities, reaching out of one of the most important aspect, and as well as contribute substantially in the development of the nation. So thank you so much for this work.